I recently picked up and read the Dune saga, and I loved it. So when I saw Dune Imperium, I got really excited because I felt like it would be a way to enter the politics and intrigue of the universe surrounding the Dune saga, and that is something that I've always wanted to do. Dune Imperium is a deck builder and worker placement strategy game. Players choose one of the 8 leaders with varying difficulties and enter the world of Dune intrigue and warfare. Players compete to earn the most victory points by the end of the game. The game reaches the ending phase if a player reaches 10 victory points or if all of the battles have been fought. Each player starts the game with 2 agents that can travel to different spaces to help them reach their goals. This game uses 3 resources that are needed to complete different actions. Solari is a type of money. Spice is a resource in high demand across the Empire, and water is essential to travel around the planet Arrakis. On the board, you can see options agents can travel to in order to gain influence. Spaces on the planet Arrakis allow you to harvest spice, recruit troops, and prepare them for battle. On the side of the board, you can see 4 primary factions: the Emperor, the Spacing Guild, the Bene Gesserit, and the Fremen. These factions also have spaces agents can go to for power or resources. In addition to this, each faction has an influence track that players can climb for victory points and other rewards. Each player starts with a simple starting deck, and each round they draw 5 cards. These cards are essential for agent movement, as they can only go to a space if they have a matching symbol on a card in their hand. Cards can also grant other advantages throughout the game. This includes resources like troops or water, or they can grant even more power, like this card that makes your opponent discard cards in their hand, or this card that increases your agent's transportation and capacity for 1 turn. After all agents take or skip their turn, each player takes a reveal turn. During this turn, players count persuasion points that allow them to draft new cards and build their deck. During the reveal turn, each player sets their combat strength, which is determined by the amount of troops they have prepared for combat that round, plus any swords on revealed cards. The last phase of each round is combat. The reward for winning changes from round to round. At this point, if neither end game condition is met, a new round begins. This game has a lot of strengths, but is also very different than I expected. I did like the utilization of resources. Money, well, that's just kind of money, so Solari wasn't like overly thematic to me, even though, money is used, so that's fine. But the spice that you play throughout the game feels very thematic, as you even have the sandworms making it if players don't go to those spaces on the board, and it just feels like carrying the spice to different factions and getting favors and that just feels very thematic to Dune, and I loved the utilization of that resource. I also really liked that you had to have water as a resource. If you wanted to go onto the planet of Arrakis and do one of the actions at some of the better spaces there, you had to have water. And the limited resource of water was really interesting because really out of all of the resources that are available in the game, water is the hardest one to pile up. In fact, I don't think I've ever gotten in a situation where I've had a lot of excess water. The choice of leaders is nice because there's 8 different leaders in a game that only plays 4 people, which means there's a little bit of variation that can occur game to game. I personally think that some leader powers are more useful than others, but I don't think it's as unbalanced enough to break the game. I really also loved the competition for influence with factions that you have with your opponents. You can even take like a influence token with that faction away from another player if you curry more favor with that faction. So the back and forth of who has more influence with each faction also felt very thematic to the Dune universe, and it was something that I thought was implemented pretty well. The combat round is also really engaging. At the beginning of each round, a conflict card is chosen, and every player can see the reward for winning the conflict that round. This caused me to pick my battles because of something that was revealed that wasn't really that useful or game-breaking. Maybe I would focus on other things that round. If something large is at stake, each player spends their entire turns trying to amass the most troops and swords as possible, and this leads to very emotional wins and losses. On these rounds, the stakes feel really high. After playing this game, even though I really enjoyed it, my greatest disappointment was that it just felt so short to me. And I guess that is somewhat thematic in itself because you need to have the most power and the most influence over the world of Dune in a very short period of time. And needing a quick and decisive win is actually pretty thematic to the universe of Dune. Regardless, I still couldn't help but feel like I hadn't really completed everything I could have, and I couldn't help but feel that I wanted a couple more rounds. The main place where I felt this the most was that there are lots of cool cards that you can draft and customize your deck. However, by the end of the game, I still felt like I had a lot of my starter cards still in my deck, and I still feel like the customization of my deck was less than in other deck building games that I played in the past. So I just didn't feel like I was able to reach the combination potential of the different cards that could have been used in the game if I had more time. This made me feel like the complexity of the game was a little bit lower than I expected because the card combos that you were able to have in that period of time just couldn't be at the same level as if you had more time to really think through what you were doing and had more time to really put something solid together. You can still do that, don't get me wrong, but it just didn't feel like it was as long as most other deck builders I had played in the past. Okay, I just want to interject real quick because I found an interesting Reddit post and I'm modifying my opinion a little bit. While I still feel like if you're going to judge Dune Imperium as a deck builder, it does fall short, I have found some opinions here that makes me just think of it in a different way. So I found this and the post says, just played my first Dune Imperium game and hated it. I did not hate it, but this person who posted this did have some of the same problems with the deck building mechanic that I did. So looking at some of the responses to that critique, a lot of people were saying that it's really just like 25% a deck building game, and it's really more heavily like 75% a worker placement game. And all the people who seem to really love this game and really be into it are using it more as worker placement. So looking at it more as a worker placement, I think it does a pretty good job if you're looking for like a mid-level complexity 90-minute worker placement game. It does do a pretty good job at that if you don't call it a deck builder. So that's just more like marketing and how people talk about it. There was this funny one though. And it says, it's not a deck builder, which should have been apparent. It's mostly worker placement. So like kind of like should have been apparent, like, come on guys. We're all just trying to have fun here. Let's be a little bit less intense. Let's turn it down. But no, I think that looking at it this way as a worker placement is a good idea, and it does make the game a lot better in how you view it if you just say not that it's a deck builder, but it's worker placement. So if you have not played it yet, I would recommend it if you're looking for something that sides more as a worker placement game. Back to my original thoughts. But this ends up being a game that can be played a lot more and hit the table a lot more often because it isn't quite to that scope that I was imagining. It is a little bit more simple. This might not actually even be a bad thing that it is accessible enough and that you don't have to like dedicate an entire day to it or anything like that, because for fans of Dune, either the books or the movies, if you're not super into board games yet, this is accessible enough to where you can learn it jumping into board gaming. It's not out of that realm of possibility. So I think that's kind of nice that it does make it more accessible to all fans of the movie and books to be able to get into board gaming too. Overall, I think this is a really solid game and I'm excited to add it to my collection. If you enjoyed this video, I recommend that you go check out my review of War of the Ring.